It was supposed to be just another Halloween party. Laughter, costumes, and harmless scares. But in Alistair's old house, the screams weren't fake, and the decorations weren't props. Because that night, one of them moved. If you dare to enter more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the next scream might be yours. The air didn't smell of autumn leaves and candy, but of something else, a palpable tension, a scent of fear. Oliver showed his provisional driving license to his mum and promised he'd drive carefully. She looked at him, her brow furrowed with worry. Alistair's house? That old sanatorium? Oliver, that place, it has a strange history. I've heard stories from the war that they performed unusual procedures there. Mom, it's just an old house. It's perfect for Halloween, Oliver said with a laugh, sliding into the driver's seat next to his friends Sophie and Reese. As they drove, the skeletal branches of the trees lining the country lane seemed to claw at the car like bony fingers. A low, mournful whistle rode the wind, sounding less like the weather and more like a distant, pleading cry. Alistair's house stood in grim isolation atop a wind-swept hill on the outskirts of town. The building indeed once was a private sanatorium, a place where wealthy families could discreetly house relatives deemed an embarrassment. Alistair's father, a property developer, had bought it for a song. From the outside, it was a vision of Gothic horror. The large wrought-iron gates were choked with rust and fake cobwebs. Jack-o'-lanterns with leering faces swayed in the wind. But the most chilling feature was the enormous, life-size statue of a Victorian gentleman in a straitjacket. The straight-jacketed man that stood sentinel before the entrance. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and its carved mouth was fixed in a terrible, knowing smile. Inside was even more unsettling. The house was filled with authentic, expensive Halloween decorations. The faux blood smears on the flocked wallpaper looked fresh and wet. Glass orbs filled with murky liquid and suspended shapeless things floated in the air. Eerie, discordant sounds echoed from hidden speakers, a faint weeping from one corner, the clank of chains from another. Alistair greeted them with a tight, peculiar smile. He was a tall, gaunt boy with eyes that held an unnerving intensity. "Welcome all. I've arranged something special for you tonight. We are going to revive the old traditions of this sanatorium." The party was in full swing. About 25 young people danced to the thumping music, their laughter a stark contrast to the macabre setting. Oliver, Sophie, and Reese decided to escape the noise and find a quieter spot in the library upstairs. There they found Charlotte and William, who had also sought refuge from the din. It was a decision that would save their lives. From below, a piercing scream cut through the music, which then abruptly died. Another scream followed, then the sound of shattering glass. "It's all part of the act, right?" Sophie whispered, her voice a fragile thread of hope. "One of Alistair's props?" Oliver peered through the crack in the library door. His blood ran cold. In the grand hall below stood 3 men wearing grotesque rubber masks, brandishing large hunting knives and a pistol. The one in the center, wearing a Victorian physician's mask, bellowed, "Silence! Everyone stay exactly where you are. This is not a game. We are here for one thing only: money." The next hour was not merely the passage of time, but a descent into a meticulously crafted hell. The intruders weren't there for money. They were connoisseurs of fear, and tonight was a feast. They segregated the guests. The girls were herded into one corner, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. The boys were forced to their knees on the hard, cold floor. Every breath in the room was a ragged, desperate thing. The physician pointed a gloved finger at Lily, who was shaking beside her boyfriend, Alex. "Bring that one." His accomplice, wearing a grotesque demon mask, dragged Lily to an antique wooden chair and bound her wrists. Alex was pummeled with brutal fists, crying out as he fell, "Leave her alone! Take whatever you want!" The physician laughed, a hollow metallic sound. "We are. Every blow settles 1,000 pounds of her debt." He nodded to his accomplice, who drove a fist into Alex's stomach. Lily's scream echoed off the high ceilings. "Please, stop!" Lily sobbed. The physician leaned in close, his masked face inches from hers. "You think we're finished? The debt is far from settled." He traced the tip of his knife along her cheekbone. The blade bit into her skin, a thin red line welling up with beads of blood. Her next scream was one of pure, unadulterated terror that raised the hairs on every arm in the room. In truth, the men knew 10,000 pounds in cash was an impossible demand. Their true goal was the sadistic pleasure of the game itself. They fed on the spectrum of fear on their captives' faces, the hiccuping sobs, the tear-streaked cheeks, the eyes wide with pleading desperation. "You're all so privileged. You have everything. Fancy homes, cars, your futures handed to you. Let's see what you look like when it's all stripped away." Another accomplice, in a smirking jack-o'-lantern mask, went through the guests' wallets and purses. He collected a few £100 at most. "This is nothing," he snarled in frustration. Then they remembered their centerpiece. The physician gestured to Alistair and his close friend Liam. "Bring those two out." There was a strange resignation in Alistair's eyes, as if he had always known this moment would come. Liam, already injured, limped as he was dragged forward. They were forced to stand before the enormous statue. The straight-jacketed man's red eyes still burned, its sinister smile unwavering. "Last chance," the physician announced, a theatrical tremor in his voice. "Give us the 10,000 pounds." Alistair looked up, tears streaming down his face, but with an unnerving calmness in his voice. "I can't. You know I can't." The physician gave the signal, a sharp upward flick of his right hand. And then it happened. The statue, which everyone had assumed was an elaborate prop, jerked to life. Metal joints groaned in protest. The large prop-like hammer it held was suddenly terrifyingly real, glimmering dully in the dim light. The statue raised its hammer with ancient slowness, then brought it down with savage force on Liam's head. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch. Liam collapsed, lifeless, to the gravel. A fountain of blood erupted from the wound. A girl in the hall shrieked, "Oh God, no!" The statue then turned its head towards Alistair. He closed his eyes. A faint, bizarre smile touched his lips. The hammer slammed into his chest. The crack of shattered ribs was audible even from inside. Alistair's cry was cut short as he fell beside his friend. The straight-jacketed man was, in fact, the intruder's fourth accomplice. He had stood motionless all night, a decoration, waiting for his horrific cue. Now he pulled off his rigid mask to reveal the gaunt, pock-marked face of a middle-aged man whose lips were twisted in a demonic grin. "Now," the physician said, pacing before the terrified crowd, "who's next for our orderly?" The slaughter unfolding below was a scene that would be seared into the minds of the 5 hidden upstairs. Every scream, every blow, every drop of blood spilled felt like a violation of their own souls. Oliver's eyes were so wide they ached, but he couldn't blink. Sophie had her hand clamped so hard over her mouth her lips were white. William, who had remained the most composed, pointed a trembling finger towards the bathroom window. His eyes screamed a silent message, now or never. They crawled towards it. William tried to lift the sash window. It gave way with a loud, grating shriek. Every heart froze. From below, a voice shouted, "Did you hear that?" Charlotte held her breath. Seconds stretched into an eternity. When no one came, they moved again. As Sophie was climbing out, her foot slipped on the windowsill. She gasped, teetering backwards into the void. Reese, right behind her, grabbed her by the waist and hauled her back. Their eyes met, a fleeting exchange of sheer mortal terror. Reese's lips moved soundlessly. "Careful." They emerged onto the flat, leaded roof. The cold night air was a shock. The feeling of being outside the house's hellish interior almost unbelievable. They scrambled to the edge, where an ancient oak tree stretched its limbs towards them like an old friend. William went first, then helped guide a shaking Sophie down. One by one they descended. The moment their feet hit the damp grass, they ran. Their shoes slipped on the wet earth. Their lungs burned like fire. The sound of a car engine roaring to life nearby spurred them to run faster, blindly through the dark. Then, in the distance, they heard it, the beautiful, terrifying wail of police sirens. The flashing blue lights cut through the darkness. They stopped as one, chests heaving, staring at each other in disbelief. Was it real? Were they truly safe? When the police arrived, the intruders were gone. They had taken not only 3 young lives, but also the innocence of those who had survived. The hall was an abattoir. The straight-jacketed statue stood impassive, as if nothing had happened. Beneath it lay Alistair and Liam, their faces frozen in a final rictus of terror. Alex, injured at the start, had bled out on the Persian rug. The walls were no longer decorated with fake gore, but with the very real, sprayed-on blood of the victims. Oliver, Sophie, Reese, Charlotte, and William had survived in body, but a part of their souls had died in that house that night. Every subsequent Halloween, when the world was filled with playful fright, their memories turned to genuine horror. The sight of a large old manor house sent a shiver down their spines. Walking past a frightening statue made their pace quicken instinctively. Every unexpected noise sent a jolt of adrenaline through their bodies. Oliver was plagued by nightmares where he was the straight-jacketed man, bringing the hammer down on his own friends. He would wake screaming, staring at his own hands to confirm they were still his. Sophie would flinch at every sudden red light, a traffic signal, a shop sign, each one a flashback to those glowing, blood-red eyes. They all knew the 10,000-pound demand had been a mere pretext. The true objective had been the fear itself, the powerlessness, the intoxicating rush of dominance the intruders sought from the faces of the privileged young. That night, they had extracted a price in terror that could never be quantified. Not just the cost of 3 young lives, but the lifelong tax of deep psychological wounds inflicted upon the survivors. A year had passed. It was Halloween night. Oliver sat in his bedroom, the sounds of laughing, costumed children drifting up from the street below. Their joy felt like a relic of a life he could no longer inhabit. His phone buzzed, a message from Sophie. "Do you hear them too? The screams? Can you sleep?" Oliver didn't reply. He looked out his window. In the distance, outside an ordinary house, someone had erected a statue of a man in a straitjacket for Halloween, a cheap imitation, and yet Oliver felt a sudden, certain conviction that it was looking directly at him. He blinked, dismissing it as paranoia, but when he looked again, he was sure. The statue's lips were curved into the same ghastly smile he remembered from that night. And then he saw its arm slowly rise, the painted hammer giving him a silent, mocking salute. Oliver yanked the curtains shut, his breath catching in his throat, and he was left to wonder if it had ever truly ended, or if it was only just beginning.